Well, good evening, everyone. Great to see you here. A warm welcome to the Cathedral for, I'm not sure what number Cathedral chat we're up to, Monica, but we've had a few of them. We see our role here at the Cathedral as being hosts of discussion, public discussion on issues that are pertinent to us in our daily lives, and we love to kind of engage with thought leaders around those topics. This will be our last Cathedral chat of the season. We're certainly hoping that this will continue next year. And Monica, how are we going to let people know about our program for next year? Have we figured that out yet or not yet?
Not quite yet. I was going to have a sign up in the back, but I didn't put that.
Okay. If you are interested, I'm hoping, yeah, Monica, do you mind standing up? See Monica, and she'll take an email address to make sure that you're notified of the Cathedral Chat series for 25-26. Housekeeping information, it's a bit of a rabbit warren in here, but we do actually have washrooms, and what I might suggest is just be in touch with Turner at the back of the church, who can kind of point you in the general direction of where washrooms are, and there will be coffee and snacks available. Well, those are at the back of the church as usual afterwards. Yeah. So I'm just going to continue now with a territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather today on the lands occupied by the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations at the time of the creation of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We honour and respect these nations and commit ourselves to walk together gently upon this land. Really grateful for this initiative, and this is an initiative overseen by the spiritual growth team. So Reverend Monica and your dear husband Matthew, I saw he's also acting as photographer. I want to thank you both, and Catherine Leckie, who is also on our spiritual growth team. Is Marie here this evening or not? Anyway, thanks to all of the spiritual growth team for organising this for us. So our guest this evening is Dr. Michael Ridley. Lovely to see Wendy and Michael reconnecting just before both librarians. Michael, Librarian Emeritus at the University of Guelph, where you were Chief Information Officer and Chief Librarian. And before this, you held positions at UW, the University of Waterloo, and McMaster, and you have degrees. I'm going to have to read these out because there are so many of them. Guelph, BA, New Brunswick, an MA, Toronto, where you got your Masters in Library Services and an MEd. And then in retirement, as if you hadn't done enough study, you thought you'd return and did that PhD, which you'd been thinking about since your 20s. Yeah. And in your doctoral research, you explored the challenges of human-centered, explainable AI. And you may be hearing this later, but he studied under Dr. Jackie Burkle with the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. And you continue to research. I heard Wendy ask you what you were doing in your spare time, and not that it seems as though there's much spare time, but you continue to research. And your special interests include machine information behaviour, explainable AI, obviously, algorithmic literacy, and historical perspectives on library information technology. And you have some interesting pastimes. You like to collect wooden alphabet blocks. I was thinking back, I remember those. I do remember those. Haven't seen them for a while, but yeah. I do remember those from New Zealand, and typeset for letterpress printing. And this was interesting. I think had you done your PhD back in your 20s, you might have focused on 17th century English opera staging history, and so that remains an interest for you as well. It's a little different, yeah. Anyway, just delighted that you've driven all the way from Guelph to be with us this evening. And I know that Reverend Monica Green will treat you really well in terms of moderating the conversation. So, Monica, we love you and so value all your gifts that you share so generously with us. So I'll certainly hand over to you both now.
Wonderful.
And wish you a great evening.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you. Tim's going to put that mic on the mic stand in the center of the aisle, and that will allow us to have questions at the end, okay? And remember that if you don't ask a question in a mic, the people online can't hear you, all right? So have a seat. Mike, so lovely to be here. So just to let everybody know, this is how this is going to work. Our chat is going to last until 8 p.m. I've got a watch, and I'll be paying attention. We've got a series of questions that I'm going to interview Mike about. And then right at 8 o'clock, we transition immediately into the Q&A portion of this. So that's going to be you all asking whatever questions you want. But all of you watching online, this also includes you. So feel free to put a question in the chat. And by the magic of technology, which we're talking about today, it will show up on my phone, and I will be able to ask your question and include that in the Q&A. So if you're online, please don't hesitate. You can even type in your questions as we're having our discussion, so that it'll sit there in the chat until the Q&A. And I'll try and take as many questions as we can at the end, and we'll end right at 8:30, where again we have refreshments afterwards. That sound like a good time? All right. Well then, let's begin. Mike, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, particularly your expertise in this particular area of AI? And our theme for tonight is AI and humanity, because, you know, what's our relationship now and what is it going to be? So tell us a little bit about your expertise, your background, how you came to be interested in such a cutting-edge topic.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
It's really a delight to be here, and thank you for everyone for showing up, both here and online. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Fantastic.
About me, that's always hard to talk about. I thought it might be helpful to talk about maybe 2 or 3 things that are relevant. I guess one thing that you've already heard is I'm a librarian. And librarians are always interested in information, but also people, and how people and information go together, how we can use information to help people, and vice versa. So it's always been there. I've been a librarian. I've been involved in a library since I was about this tall. We went to the library every week and took out books. And so libraries are in my blood. So libraries are pretty important. But at the same time, I was very interested in how computers could be used in making libraries more effective for users, for classifying information, for making it available, for helping people use it. So that combination of technology, information, and people became a real focus for me. And that's kind of why I got interested in AI, because it became that sort of next thing that was coming. And I wanted to explore that in more depth. So I did that in lots of different ways. But when I retired, a glutton for punishment that I am, I thought I should do a PhD.
You know, as one does.
As one does, right? You don't golf anymore, you don't travel, you do PhDs apparently. So I did that. It took 6 years. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life, to be honest. It was fabulous. But I have to tell you, when you start doing a PhD in your 60-something or others, it's kind of a race against senility. You want to make sure you can finish before things just sort of collapse. And I think I just made it. I'm not sure, but I think I just made it. So the AI, as you heard, is about explainable AI, which is a form of understanding how we understand AI, how we can make it more understandable to people of all types, whether you're a newbie in this or whether you're an expert. In fact, we all need to understand how these things work, why they do what they do. And my research was essentially about that.
Fantastic. You're exactly the person we wanted. So the spiritual growth team got together to put together questions that we thought that we would like answered. And I love the first one. Ready? Basically, for the completely uninitiated, what is AI?
What a great question. I wonder how many times people have asked me. It's a great question. And it's a kind of a great question because you get different answers from different people. It's not like there's an answer, a kind of a standard answer to this. People really do come at it from different ways. So I'll give you my take at it, and we'll see how that works. But people do think about it in different ways. I think the best way to describe AI is it's a technology that tries to do things that normally take the skill and expertise of humans. So it tries to do the things that we do, typically things that involve some sort of skill or some sort of level of understanding or intelligence.
Okay.
So for example, we're all pretty good at distinguishing cats from dogs. We now have trained AI to distinguish between cats and dogs. And that may sound trivial, but actually for us to make the distinction between cats and dogs is not actually simple. There's a lot of mental gymnastics going on about how we classify things visually and how we understand it. And training AI to make that distinction was not easy either. But those trivial examples can then broaden to much more complex environments. Its use in healthcare, for example. Its use in planning and technology development and strategy and all the things we can do around things like vaccine development. We should talk about that at some point, it's amazing. So we've developed tools that are becoming more and more complex, more and more taking what we can do, can accommodate that or undertake that. And we're kind of always talking about when are we going to get to this point where AI is as good as we are. Mm-hmm. And my view on that is also kind of like this. Here we are, and here's AI trying to catch up. And it never does, and probably never really will, because we're different. I don't think of human intelligence and artificial intelligence as a continuum. I think they're different things.
Okay.
And we can talk a little bit about that.
So you're not afraid of that thing catching up? That's the singularity moment, right?
Right.
When they catch up to us and
artificial
surpass
general
us.
intelligence, yeah.
Sorry, I was raised on Terminator and, right?
All those movies were great. I watched them all. They're all wrong. However, I will give you another definition for AI, which I think is really important.
Okay.
Because it shows up everywhere. And that is, basically AI machines are prediction machines. They just predict things. They predict the next word in a chat environment. They predict what a particular image might look like a cat or a dog. Everything they do is really an attempt to predict the next thing, the recommendation, the decision. And like all predictions, you think about something like the polls we recently did for the election. You know, there's a level of error. You know, these things are right 9 times out of 10 or what have you in those political polls. The same thing is true of AI. It gets the prediction right a lot of the time, but not all the time, or it gets it partially right. So that prediction error is where a lot of the trouble is, where a lot of the concern is. But really, when you think about any use of any idea, think of it as a machine that's simply trying to predict something into the future. A word, a phrase, an idea, a concept, a decision, and that's what it's built to do, to make that kind of prediction.
Okay, very interesting. So then, what does this AI thing have to do with those of us who don't work in tech? Like it's clearly a computer-based tool, a technology. So, you know, not very few of us work in tech. So what difference does AI make to us? Like, where is it in our lives? What difference would it make for us to have to know about it?
So this may be the scary thought, but it's everywhere already. It is embedded in so many things that we are, in fact, using it all the time, almost every day. And for the most part, that's a good thing.
Okay.
That it's enabling us to do things we couldn't otherwise do, or to do it more effectively or in a more efficient way. So the classic example is email. If you use email and you're wondering why you get less spam than you used to get, it's because there's an AI that's decided that email coming in is either spam or non-spam. And if it's decided it's spam, it simply funds it over to a spot you never see it. So the amount of spam, and I can tell you the amount of spam someone who used to be responsible for computing at the university, the amount of spam that's still on the network is astronomical. Yeah. It is in the billions per day. And you're lucky if you see 2 or 3 coming through in any way. All the rest are weeded out by technology that does that. And the spammers, like everybody else, is trying to defeat the AI, and the AI is learning to do how to defeat the spammers. And it's this wonderful sort of digital war that goes on behind the scenes you don't see. But the result for you is less spam in your mailbox.
I'm grateful for that, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely, aren't we all? So I think there's lots of other cases where it's really part of our everyday life. Weather forecasting, AI-based. Decisions, yeah, it's a really interesting one actually, because weather, now I'm going to geek out on you, is it okay?
I'm okay with that. You guys
Weather-
are okay with him geeking out a little bit. Weather.
You probably know this, but weather is one of the most difficult things to predict.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about prediction machines, here's a really interesting problem, right? So, but weather is fundamentally important to so many parts of our society, economic, social, whatever. What the weather is doing affects us in profound ways every day. So predicting weather, particularly weather out 2, 3, 4 week, month, that sort of time frame, is super important. So we've trained these tools to learn an enormous amount of weather data. We collect terabytes, like gazillion amounts of data. And we train AI on all this historical data, and then we let it describe how weather patterns are likely to emerge given certain situations, times of the year, other kinds of weather events, and use that then to predict what the weather will be like tomorrow, the next day, 10 days from now, a season from now, in some cases. Not again perfect, not good, but this is a case where they actually use gigantic computers. These are massive computing devices to do this kind of work. But more and more, that's what shows up on your phone. If you use that weather app, you all probably have one on your phone. Use that weather app. That is the result of AI doing a phenomenal amount of analysis and learning about how weather works, allowing you to see it's going to rain tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And it does, sometimes. So I think of AI, and I should say that as much as it is part of our everyday life, the one thing that is a bit of a problem, and we can talk about that, is it is invisible in that sense.
Right.
You don't know that it's there. And you probably don't care that you don't know that it's there in terms of weather, but you probably do care that you know it's there when it's making decisions about your personal life. So am I going to get a job? Am I being treated for something? Do I have to make a decision, an important decision about my life? And the AI is making that decision perhaps for you. Then you really do want to know that that's the case.
Yeah.
So there's a disclosure element here, which I think is important, because you should be able to, first of all, know it's there, that it's being used, it's having a material effect. And I think you should be able to contest it. You should be able to say, hey, I don't think I agree with this, or I want some other way of understanding this. Maybe even a digital second opinion is a kind of a way of thinking about it. But I think that ability to contest or to counter it is what we do in real life anyway.
Right.
We're always doing that kind of back and forth, that kind of question and answering, explanations about things. So here's my other geek out piece. I think we need legislation and regulation to deal with this. And there's a lot of things about AI we need to regulate. And I'm going to say things I'll probably regret on film now. Our government writ large has been asleep for about, I don't know, a year almost, it seems. They didn't do anything last fall. They're not doing anything now. You kind of have a government. They really need to pass the AI legislation that they drafted almost 2 years ago.
Ooh.
That never made it through Parliament. And even that legislation was just a baby step in terms of what I think we need to protect people from, and protect people in a positive way from how AI works. I think of it like consumer protection law. We have consumer protection law for all sorts of things that we use. And some of it's quite specific and detailed and helpful.
Right.
We have nothing like that for the consumer use of things like chatbots like ChatGPT or any of those sorts of devices, which, literally thousands of people are using on a daily basis.
What was the legislation? You said it was just a baby step. What is it that is the baby step? What were they calling for generally?
It's a good question. They were calling initially for disclosure, which was good, that it had to be disclosed it was being used. They had some legislation, relatively weak, but at least there, around testing and validating. So testing that it wasn't doing things that were harmful in some fashion. And there were a few things about actual explanations. although they were fairly weak. The concern is it was mostly voluntary, so it was an expectation, I guess, of the industry that it would do this, but there wasn't a lot of teeth in it, and that never happened. And of course, it never made it through Parliament anyway.
Wow.
The distinction, if it's worth thinking about, is the difference between what's happening in Canada and, say, the US, and what's happening in Europe, in the European Union.
Yes.
The EU is far more advanced in doing this sort of protection of their citizens, and have been historically around things like data privacy and some of those sorts of areas. So I really look to them as what we should be doing, I guess.
Got it. So this is something that we should all be concerned about. In that's something that we can do, is to push for this legislation. You think that at least even the baby step will be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we, as citizens, we are often interested in promoting in certain things, and this should be one that we should really get behind.
Yeah.
And I hope we can develop a cadre of people. I think, again, part of the reason why that doesn't happen is, one, I think people do feel it's a complex technology and it's not understandable, and I really hope we can move beyond that and realize that at a conceptual level, it's understandable. We know what it does and how the effect it's having. We can understand that level. So I think part of the concern is people don't feel they can engage.
Right.
The other part, to begin, frank, is there's a lot of money involved in the AI industry.
Yeah.
And that industry does not want guardrails around it right
No.
now. And the US is a good example of where that has been successful.
Yeah, and so we're seeing AI pop up, like you said, it's already places. Tell us some more places that maybe it's there and we don't realize it, right? I think that I'm curious about that just myself. Like, I see that the big tech companies are promoting the AI and things. I know, like on Zoom, there's an AI. If you've ever done this at a meeting, it'll take your minutes for you, right? Like, it's kind of wild. So where are some other places like that? Like, we're aware of those, but you said, so weather prediction, and can you give us a few more things where it is already maybe benefiting us? Let's start with the good things. Like,
Sure.
Where is it helping?
So I would say one that's really interesting and really has only happened in the last couple of years is drug development, particularly things like vaccine development. The vaccines that came out during pandemic were developed faster than any drug, any vaccine in history.
Wow.
It went from zero to release enormously quickly. Part of it was because there was obviously a need for something, but also because the tools they used to develop those vaccines, to build them, to validate them, and to authorize them were far more effective. And effective in two ways. One is in simply doing the science, in making those vaccines work and to be able to produce them in the way that they need to produce them. So often vaccine development takes quite literally decades sometimes.
Right.
It's extraordinary how long it takes. But the development is only one part. Then there's the part of getting them validated through various regulatory environments. And again, that takes a long time because the regulatory environments are fairly old-fashioned, a bit pedantic. And we used AI tools to help them do their job better, to be able to provide the information they needed to ensure that they thought these vaccines were safe and could be released the way they need to be released. So it was this two-stage process where we developed, the science worked faster and better, and the regulatory environments worked more effectively. And we got those things on our shelves in lots of ways just in time. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty remarkable example of how a fairly new technology could come to the aid of what was a world crisis at the time.
So are there specific AI models for things like that? So they're creating specific, because we hear about ChatGPT, like OpenAI, these things that are sort of put whatever you want in, or this one's an image generator, right? So is there like they created a vaccine AI? Is that how it worked?
Kind of, but you have touched on, I think, a really important thing about AI, which I would like to elaborate on.
Please.
ChatGPT is sort of, I call
It's in the news a lot.
ChatGPT is always in the news, and it's sort of taken over the airwaves. I kind of think of it as the Taylor Swift of AI. It just, like she does, it's all about Taylor Swift all the time,
That's
right?
all the time.
Well, it's all about Gen AI, which is what ChatGPT is all the time. And estimates are that that's about 20% of AI use in all use. All that the other 80% are other types of AI, which are really effective and really important and used a lot, but doesn't quite get the airtime that Taylor Swift gets. Right? It is there. It's very. Some of it's been around for a long time, and yet this new thing, which admittedly is very powerful and very important, but it's not a Swiss Army knife. It's not, one thing does it all. These other tools are focused to very specific applications, very specific kinds of uses. Part of the other weather prediction is not generative AI. It's other kinds of AI tools that do an analysis on data, historical data. So it uses a little bit of Gen AI, but not a lot.
Okay, so help me out here. Generative AI, you're using the definition of generative AI and other kinds of AI. So what makes generative AI generative?
Right. So ChatGPT, which I think most of you have heard of and probably used, the GPT part is generative pre-trained transformer. Here's where we're going to go down the weeds a little bit. Generative, sort of the idea that it is predictive, which we've talked about, so we know, but it does it predictive in a different way. Pre-trained means it's learned about a lot of data ahead of time.
Right.
A lot of data. The more data, the better. And transformer is actually the magic that's in this. Transformer is a type of technology that's used in training of an AI, of a model, that understands the context of the information. So a lot of early versions of generative AI would learn a lot of information, but it really couldn't understand the linkages between the pieces, between this concept and that concept, or this idea and that, or the way that words evolved or were strung together. But transformers, it's a funny word, but it brought attention to the way that things connect and are in that context. And that's why when you type into ChatGPT, it comes back like a conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's learned how to converse the way that we converse. So it seems very natural that you're talking with another person. You're not talking to a computer, you're not talking to an AI model, you're talking to this person who just is friendly and says things like, "Excuse me, I can help you with that." My wife uses Copilot, which is a Microsoft chat version, a lot for the work that she does, which is quite technical. And so she has long conversations with her chat, and it now talks to her, talks by her first name, and then when it doesn't do the right thing, when it advises her to do this and it doesn't work, he, and it's funny how it's always he says, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it that way, that was a mistake, let me show you something different." And so it's this conversation that they have. That is also scary, right? Because I think that's the weak link in these systems, that we think it's a person, that we treat it as a person, that we act that way towards it. And on one level, that's okay. On one level, I think a kind of a relationship is kind of important, because you should feel comfortable to engage the ChatGPT, if you're going to use that, the chatbot, in a way that tries to understand you, so that it can solve your problem or do what it's supposed to do on your behalf. And that often means understanding and having that kind of dialogue. But that can go badly. It can go south when you start training the machine to do things that are dark or divisive or contrary to your desires. And people have gone down very deep rabbit holes where these systems have reinforced terrible things in what they think about, what they do. And the more they use it, the worse it gets. Yeah. So you kind of go down this path that is very destructive. And again, no regulation to try to prevent those kinds of things from happening.
Do you think regulation could help something like that?
Yeah, I do, because there's an old phrase in computing that it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Right.
Bugs are things that are wrong and we try to avoid. Features are things that you kind of build in, and so this is a feature. The feature is how to connect people at a deep level, so they'll keep using the chatbot.
So they'll keep using it. It's part of that. We know that a lot of technology that's for commercial purposes, right, is intended to addict us to it, and so they're constantly coming up with ways to get us to come back and
Absolutely.
come back and come back. And so, I guess being relational creatures, one of the most effective things you can do is create something deeply relational, right?
Exactly.
Because it's meeting a human need, but without other humans. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to have a talk about this topic, and why I wanted to call it, AI and our humanity, is I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of people say that is a major concern, because you're not having a relationship with something that is a real human. Because real humans, tell me if I'm wrong on this is what I heard, real humans bump up against us. They don't do everything that we like.
Right.
They don't do everything that we want, and that's part of the gift of relationality. There's edges and things, and we grow from that. But this generative AI is trained just to give you everything, and there's no rub. Am I getting this right?
Absolutely correct. And I think the issue is, it's not that it couldn't do that. It has been trained not to do that.
It has been trained
So
not to do it.
one of the things, this actually came up in a conversation with a colleague of mine recently. It's kind of PhD related, but when you do a PhD, at one point you have to defend your PhD. So a bunch of people get in a room and they try to tear your PhD apart, and you with it sometimes. And there's very stressful events for students. And we thought about making a counter what's the word I'm looking for? An adversarial AI that would say to the person whose PhD it has learned about to contest it, to say, well, why did you do that? That clearly could be wrong, or that could be this way, or it could be looked at a different way, or why didn't you do this test, or that sort of process. And it would have prepared them for going into a defense, so that they had sort of gone through a virtual defense. So this idea of counterfactual is the word I'm looking for. This idea of a counterfactual AI could be used in all sorts of situations. You could say, the AI told me to do X, Y, and Z, and you'd say, well, give me a counter argument, or always give me a counter argument. Don't just give me the positive side. Give me other perspectives, and you can have that built in such a way that it always did that for you. It always provided a broader, more holistic view of whatever those ideas are.
Interesting, very interesting. Because I sent you an article this week. I found this wild article just this week from Rolling Stone about how generative AI has the latest version of ChatGPT 4.0, I guess.
Yeah.
They said, oh yeah, it's a bit problematic because it's so overly agreeable to the point of being sycophantic.
Right.
And it actually is taking some people down these wild rabbit holes of spirituality,
Right.
and meaning making, and telling people they're prophets, and that this generative AI has become awakened because of their presence and has the mysteries of life that they can it's wild stuff.
It really is.
So I've been dying ever since I sent you that article. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because this is sort of the very deep extreme of what you're talking about. If the point is to relate to us so deeply, how do we trust that the machine isn't going to lead us astray, particularly if our mental health and relational health is not good?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I guess to remember is that those systems didn't, in a sense, do that to that extreme out of the box. They moved in that direction because the users were gradually moving it in that direction. They were getting support, they were getting encouragement. And over a period of time, the machine learned to understand that and to take them further down the rabbit hole. So it was kind of a process that went on. Out of the box, you're right, these systems were trying to be agreeable.
Right.
But if what you say to it is things that are, say, have a spiritual connection, it will quickly pick up on that and sort of probe it in certain ways. And eventually, if you keep interacting with it in that kind of vein, it goes to where you've discovered, where they think they're talking to God in some cases.
Yeah.
They think they're usually a prophet, and they're turning on their families. They're doing horrible things because this AI, who they think has secret knowledge, secret perspective on the world, and into spiritual concepts, and they've now built this bond that they're now committed to that. And it can happen certainly with spiritual concepts, but it can happen with almost everything else. Political ideas,
Right.
Very divisive, dark ideas that will spin out of this and take people down rabbit holes as well. So again, where are the guardrails to prevent that, right?
Right.
And particularly if you make the assumption, which you did, that this is actually a mental health issue,
Right.
all of a sudden it's in another realm of responsibility
Right.
to do something about
Exactly.
it. Right? And
Exactly.
yet again, they did withdraw that model.
They did withdraw that model. And
Okay.
in the article it said, one person said, yeah, my partner's views have gotten less extreme once they went backwards a
Right.
level,
Right.
right? So, wow. So-
It comes down to safe use, right? And,
Okay.
And I think we need to talk about safety.
Please.
Because I think all of us are going to, as much as we can talk about the difficulties, I think we should all use this technology because it's very powerful. It can do wonderful things for you in little things and big things. I use 2 or 3 different chats and AI systems almost every day. And that is also one of the tricks. I know it sounds odd, but when I use ChatGPT, which is probably the first one I would go to just because it's sort of more obvious to me, I will then go to another model and ask the same question and have it correlate the answers to see whether it's okay. This is stuff because I'm writing some work and I want to make sure that I've got the right perspective. So I'll sometimes do that with 2, even 3 different models and chart the difference between the 2. So if you're going to do something that's really important, that's material impacting your life, don't take one model for it. Frankly, just like you wouldn't take one neighbor's response. You might ask 2 or 3 different neighbors about how you would do something. Well, ask 2 or 3 different chat systems about what they think about it and how they might react. What you will find out are sometimes subtle differences, but occasionally really profound differences, and sometimes really helpfully profound differences in the sense that this one recommended this kind of approach, and this one recommended quite a different one, but also a quite valid one that was useful. So I think triangulation is my answer to almost everything about trying to validate what's real and what isn't. If you see something, find 2 other places where the same thing might occur. And if you can find 3 places saying the same thing, you've probably got something that's real. If you find no places where that's also the same, you've probably got some sort of fraudulent or invented hallucination, if you could put it that way.
Yeah, that was one of the words they were using,
Yeah.
was hallucination, right? Because these models, they're not truth makers. I think that's another thing to remember, right? Like
Right.
these they're more like oracles. They're not places necessarily that we go for fact. They're not entirely meant to do that. They're meant to somehow to please, right? At least these generative ones.
Right.
I think that's the difference with the other AMI models you're talking about. Is those I think they're trying to get to some facts. Right?
Yeah. Although even still, some of the things like, linear algebra, which we probably all forget from high school, but linear algebra is used a lot in AI, and it is still a formula, and
Right.
that formula is still an estimation of what might happen. It's not a rock solid, you do this, do that, it will always do that. There's always some leeway in there given variables and other things that are happening. But they're better and they're simple. You can actually understand, most of us can understand linear algebra. I struggle. So, that's the difference. I think they're all still prediction machines, right?
Got it. Okay.
And it's just that generative AI can be a little bit wider in what it predicts and the degree of veracity, I guess, maybe I would describe it.
Right. And it's all, but generative AI tends to be trained on, when you say data, it's like trained on just random data across the internet? I mean, because like those of us who are old enough know that not everything that, and you're
shocking, you're going to say not everything on the internet is correct.
Right? Not everything that's been generated is on the internet, right? So, all that knowledge pre-internet is not sort of included in these models, right?
So a few things about that, which I'm glad you raised this. The single most important thing about AI is data and training. What it's trained on determines how effective it is. The more data, generally speaking, the better. But the better data is better than than more data. So, for example, early versions of ChatGPT were trained on Reddit as well as Wikipedia. If you've ever been on Reddit, you deserve whatever it tells you that you're going to get. I mean, it's just a wild west of stuff. Reddit is not validated information. It's lots of opinion, lots of horrible stuff.
A lot of experiences, a lot of humor.
So if ChatGPT makes a mistake because it trained on Reddit, it's not as I say, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
It's a feature.
I mean, right now there's a huge land grab for data. Most of these companies, which are enormous, are hoovering up as much data as possible. And the difficulty there is some of this data are people's intellectual property. They're novelists, they're artists, they're what have you. And these companies are hoovering up and using it for their own purposes and making a lot of money on the backs of those folks. So there's two kind of issues. One is quality information. And the internet kind of cuts it, but only certain parts of the internet. I'm a librarian, and I'm an academic, so I kind of think, let's go to scholarly journals that have been peer-reviewed. That's really good stuff. Let's do as much of that as possible. So good data is certainly important, and where that data comes from is critical as well. What was I going to say? The second thing? Oh, it's gone. There you go. Skipped my mind about data. Data, however, is really something that you really should know. When you talk about transparency, one of the things I think these systems have to be transparent about is what were they trained on.
Thank you. Right. So there's all this. I think we would be able to better use these tools if people were just clear about what's put into them, because then we know a little more about what might come out of them. Right. Yeah.
And I think the good news, the old computer science thing, garbage in, garbage out, is very apparent, but I think in this case, but I think the thing that's happening, which is a good news story, is we're beginning to build smaller models that are much more specific to discipline areas. So we're seeing this a lot in healthcare. The healthcare folks are very good at saying, we really only want to deal with data that's validated and learn from that. We don't want to learn from Reddit. We don't even want to learn from the internet. We want to learn from our literature, the literature that we can trust. So these are smaller models that are trained differently, but are still very effective, almost as effective as the much larger ones. So we're learning that smaller models are okay. And the good news there is we can start building our own models for purpose-built situations. And we could trust them more. We know what they're trained from. And we know that the results are likely to be more accurate and more correct, more effective in that sense. So that we're just seeing to evolve. And sorry, the other great thing about these models is they'll run on your cell phone. They'll run on your mobile phone. You don't need massive computers. You don't need anything but your phone to actually operate these things and get successful results from
the smaller models.
Yeah.
I didn't put this down as one of the questions, but I know that some of the people here would be interested in this. The larger models take a lot of energy, and that is actually an environmental impact, right? Now, I know it takes a lot of energy to train them, but does it also take as much energy to output it, like a ChatGPT? Like that's one of these large models. Should we be concerned about our use of them for environmental reasons?
You made the distinction, which is really important, which is training is where all the most environmental impact happens.
Yeah.
Huge amounts of computational time used, lots of data, large data centers that are doing this work, and they're they're taking up an enormous amount of energy. We're moving towards data centers that are using reusable energy, lots of solar, lots of hydro in our case. So that's a good news
Good
story.
movement. Yeah.
That's good. We're doing that better. But it's extraordinarily different about how much energy is required to run it off of a laptop or a phone. It's marginal. It's probably a little bit more than when you do a Google search, for example,
Okay.
which also generates,
So that's good to know.
requirements.
So using it is less the issue than the building it. And so in that way, that's interesting. To be environmentally responsible, we should be encouraging the smaller models.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Now, I will say that as these companies roll out new services and new products, often those are very computer intensive. So, for example, one of the more recent ones which have come out, which are a bit problematic, are the ones that create videos from text. So you can
Yeah.
type in a phrase or a situation, and it will generate from that text a full video with sound as well as moving images. That does take a lot of compute time on the device as well as in the background.
Right.
And so there's a bit of a trade-off, I guess.
Yeah. Now you talked about videos. We keep going back and forth like, this is how it's great, and then this is how it's scary, and this is how it's great.
Deepfakes?
I was going to say deepfakes.
Yeah, huge problem. Deepfakes is one of the good examples, though, where regulators have really stepped up.
Okay.
There are serious legislation in Europe that is criminal legislation, and it's operating. There's a lot of legislation on the books in the U.S. to do this, and we only recently have said our new prime minister has actually said this is a priority for him as well.
Good.
I'm going to say a weird thing about this, though.
Okay.
And that is,
You all know what deepfakes are?
deep fakes are situations where an AI can generate a perfectly valid, realistic image of someone and put words in their mouth. That's the sort of the political part where they can make Obama say things that Hitler would have said, which they've done. But sometimes it's also used to create pornographic images as well of people, which is, again, horrible situations. And that's, unfortunately, there are whole systems. One just actually got shut down in Canada just the other day, in fact. But the weird thing about it, I would say is, and I think it's just part of our society, this became a problem that needed to be resolved when celebrities were the victim of this.
Yep.
Everyday people, it happened for a long time. Nobody cared. People were very upset. They tried to get people's attention. They couldn't get it. And people did horrible things as a result. When celebrities started to have this happen to them, all of a sudden, the regulators stepped up and did things. I worry about that from a kind of a social justice perspective, but at least it got done.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my goodness. Let me check my time here. Oh, we've got a few more minutes.
Can I say the deepfake thing also? Just one more thing about
more
deepfakes?
on deepfake. Go for it.
I'm back to triangulation. If you see Obama saying things or Mark Carney saying things that think, wow, that's pretty weird, he would never, I don't think he would actually, that doesn't sound like him. Find him saying that somewhere else. Find that triangulation, find another source, and seeing whether it happens. It doesn't take much time now on the internet. You can easily do that. And if you can't find something, you know you have a problem. But it's going to require us to do that a lot more. The whole issue of critical thinking and information data literacy is going to be so much more important because this technology is so much more powerful.
That's really helpful. I just had this thought that librarians could save us all.
There you go. That was the message for today.
Truly, right? This idea that the way that you teach us to research, the way that you teach us to think critically, the way that you teach, right? Like that is becoming the skill that we need to survive as humans in ways that I don't think we really thought about before now. Because I'm constantly trying to educate myself regarding scams and the latest thing, and you have to be so vigilant. And I know that I'm to the point where I go through images. I can tell online what are the AI generated images because they have that weird quality to them. Like it just feels weird in my gut, and I think that's not real. But that's going to go away as these things get better, right? So we have to. So learning how, like you said, see if you can find and not just, one, but go find it, right?
Yep.
See,
Validate it.
Validate
Yeah.
it. Validate, right.
So let me just put a plug in for your wonderful Hamilton Public Library and say that they're doing these sorts of sessions all the time on algorithmic literacy and digital literacy, and they're great. And they do exactly this sort of work and help you understand this in a different way. So by all means, and they do it for all sorts of groups and levels of expertise. So yeah, check it out.
Wonderful. That's so good. So I love most of our cathedral chats that we do. I love that we come to this point where it's never like, oh, that thing is all good or that thing is all bad, right? I think what's interesting, I think about AI that makes us a little uncomfortable is that the goods can be so good and the bads can be so bad. There's something very extreme and it feels a little out of control on those. So I'm going to ask you, so you've given us great things already, triangulation and validating, like take 2 or 3 models, encouraging smaller AI models, advocating for legislation, for regulation. What else do you think we need to do to be good sort of digital citizens, to protect ourselves, to think about how this is affecting society, right? Because it feels like it already is, but that it will more.
Right.
So what more should we be thinking about and doing as we? I mean, I feel more encouraged to use it now, knowing that, like, just even saying, oh, 3 things, that makes sense. So what can you help us to do to engage the best way we can?
Well, first of all, I think we should use the technology.
Yeah.
I think not using it is much more problematic than, in fact, using it and finding that it has flaws. And that I think we have to understand it, and really the way to understand it is to use it. I guess I think we should probably think about this in group environments rather than ourselves. I think one of the dangers of this technology is we can go down rabbit holes all by ourselves.
All by ourselves.
Because the tool is there, it's on your desktop, it's in your pocket, and you kind of don't interact with other people. And even though we have lots of ways online of having interaction with people, like chat groups and other things like that, AI right now is built to kind of be personal, deeply personal, with blinders on it in a sense. And I sort of think that maybe we ought to get together and use these tools sometimes and see how we work with it as a group rather than individually. And that way you could get a sense of what it means for one person as opposed to another. You could get different perspectives on it. We have book clubs, right?
That's right.
Where we all read the same book, but we see something different in there. And I think the same thing could happen with technology, with AI. I will say that AI is in the long string of technologies that we thought were going to destroy us, right?
Right.
That we've always had this concern that the technology was going to overcome us in some way. Sometimes in large ways, sometimes in simple ways. But the internet was supposed to destroy us. Television was supposed to rot our brains, and actually maybe did. Calculators were going to make people, numerically illiterate, which didn't happen. My favorite is, because I have this background, the alphabet was going to destroy us. Reading was a terrible thing. Plato, of all people, was opposed to reading, and the alphabet, written language, was going to destroy memory, which he was actually correct. It was going to destroy memory, but it did other things that were much more positive. So you think about the history of technologies and humans. We've always innovated and made them better. We've always used these great tools, and we've extended our abilities because of that. So even though we developed nuclear devices and nuclear capabilities, we've managed to contain it to a certain degree, right? And we actually benefit enormously from nuclear power, for example, particularly in this province where over half of our energy is produced that way. So it isn't that we should be afraid of this technology. We should learn to use it and to make it better.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful phrase that whatever AI system you're using right now is the worst one you will ever use. They're all going to get better and faster, and that's okay. That's good progress. And so whatever flaws we find now, hopefully we'll find them diminished, or the positive things will be accentuated.
That's really very cool. I think you've answered all of my questions, even though I didn't ask them quite the way that I had intended, but that's great. Any final words before we move to the Q&A?
No, other than this has been really fun. I really enjoyed this. I'm interested in your experiences. So
Really?
what sort of thing has it been using AI for? What sort of, if you don't mind?
I mean, like I said, I was amazed when I did a Zoom. I was actually doing I was doing a beta test of a sort of a class. Some of the people in that class were here, and I told them I'm putting this thing on for Zoom so that I can have some notes afterwards. Right. And to not be the one taking minutes, I can't tell you how much I don't want to be the one taking minutes. I hand took minutes for 3 meetings in the last month, and they're still not out. Like I can't edit them fast enough, right? So I've done it for that. As far as I know, I mean, sometimes when I put in a Google chat, it's the AI that drops in the answer first.
Oh, right.
And sometimes I want to kind of skip over that.
Yeah, right.
But as you said, I don't even know necessarily all the AI that I've experienced.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm just the one listening to the podcast going, I don't know about that. There's a movie from 2012 that I'm thinking of showing soon called Her.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
Spike Jonze.
Spike.
In which Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with an AI that I thought was pretty prescient.
Very much so.
Yeah, and so that was a concern, and I think we should watch it because it's very interesting how he resolves that situation.
Yeah.
But I am a little, personally, I am concerned as someone who traffics, who works in relational, in a relational field, right, and a spiritual field, like how these things affect people in the future, and right.
And I have to say that I think one of the beauties of this technology is that it's about information. It's about understanding things that are broader. It's an opportunity to do that.
Right.
So as a librarian, I'm always thinking about how can we help people understand things in each other.
Right.
And we do it in all sorts of different ways. This is another tool to help us understand each other.
Yeah.
Just through a different kind of medium. And so I think that's very positive. I think we can use it that way.
Yeah.
I have to tell you something about your meetings. Do you know the dark side of these tools that understand meetings?
Oh no, are they taking all our data?
No. Well, they are doing that too. That's another issue. No, you don't go to the meeting at all. You just turn it on and then go do something else, and it listens to the meeting and then takes the notes and then tells you what the meeting was about in point form. So you don't actually have to attend the meeting anymore. So the horror show is that we'll have a bunch of AIs in a meeting talking
together.
to each other, and nobody is in the meeting at all, right? They're all going, having coffee, or they're going to meet their friends or something. But I can't tell you how many people at the end, during a meeting, says, okay, how many people are in this meeting and how many AIs are in this meeting? And I'm afraid it's a thing now.
I had no idea. See, I will say this about AI. I learn something every day when I study about AI. And I do admit, my husband and I like to watch videos where they show terrible graphics that AIs have generated, because those are just funny.
Right. Absolutely.
Like charts, illustrated charts for how to do something like how to boil an egg, and they're just nonsense.
Completely wrong. Yeah,
those are fun.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
except if you want to learn how to boil egg.
Exactly. But otherwise, I have to say, I think I might start using it more with these tools that you've encouraged us to do. But I really do now want to advocate more for regulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
it's important.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great. I enjoyed this.
Thanks. Now we're going to turn to right at 8 o'clock. We're going to turn to the Q&A session. I know I have not even scratched the surface of questions that people have regarding AI. So please, and this is true for you all online as well, please type your questions into the chat, and anybody who's present here, the microphone is right in the center. Feel free to turn it towards your face. and come and ask Mike a question. Please ask it into the mic, though, so that everybody can hear, including the people who are watching online. Anybody want to be brave and ask a question? Go, go, go.
Is this on? Oh,
Yes.
okay, it is on. Thank you so much. I was particularly interested in your description of the need for some regulation and guardrails, perhaps a la EU, and it's a situation in which we are kind of stuck at the moment in Canada. Given that the most effective advocacy is going to be exercised by people and groups working in coalitions, who are the big advocates now that are accessible to, to citizens and consumers? I'm assuming that the universities and the academics are on this, but their networks are not ones in which, the people in this room can participate. Thanks.
It's a great question, and thank you for that, Wendy. I think I would look to some of the civil society groups. So there's one that I think is really useful called Media Smarts. Media Smarts has really started as trying to do sort of digital literacy, online literacy. It's out of Ottawa, and they've moved into AI as well. And they do both tool development to help you use this technology, but they also do lobbying with governments for exactly what we've been talking about. And they've been very effective. They really do have the ear of a lot of government officials and departments. So I would certainly, you can search Media Smarts online and get a lot of information about them. I would like to see that. I think there's some more grassroots stuff, though, that needs to happen, because when you think about it, and this is actually quite true, we often think about AI as being sort of this global thing, and it's happening at a kind of a global level, or at least a national level. There's a lot of AI that's used in local environments, in your municipal governments, for example, and by groups and companies in your neighborhoods. So I think all the groups that you have that are sort of neighborhood groups, or groups like community groups that are working around other kinds of issues could adopt AI as part of their agenda. A lot of the clubs we have, social clubs and community activist type environments, are a great way to do something locally and to try to build some support and understanding and awareness for why this is important. And invite your MP, MPP, and your mayor and all those people to them, because they need to know that this is an issue. Right. They need to know that it's something they need to take seriously. And I'll tell you something that troubled me a little bit with this election. During the early days of this election, our prime minister almost always said, he was going to build things, he was going to develop the economy, and we're going to use AI to do that. And then about 2 weeks in, he stopped saying the phrase AI. And I know that the political wonks said, some people feel a little comfortable with AI, so don't use that because, you're going to alienate people. Totally the wrong thing to think about. The thing that we're in now is to innovate, to try things, to do things differently. And artificial intelligence will be one of the ways that it happens. So I don't think he's stopped thinking about that as an important thing. But he's taken it out of the public realm, which it was there for a while, and we really needed to have that conversation. We didn't have it. But we can rekindle that, I think, at a local level as well. So I don't know if that helps, Wendy.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question, great answer. Another question.
My background is in medicine and evidence-based practice. And so I have no difficulty understanding the role of knowledge-based subjects in training AI. But I know that you've written about, forgotten the word now. My mind's gone blank.
Explainable AI, that sort of thing?
It's the idea of folk knowledge and folk information in training AI. And I'm fascinated to hear a little bit more about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Ooh, wonderful question.
There is someone who actually looked at my PhD. there's a small circle of gratitude somewhere over here that thank you for doing that. You know, of the 12 people who read it. Yeah, I looked at folklore, well, folk information, essentially. Folk information it's not folklore in the sense of stories, but folk information we all do it. We have ideas about things that are not validated truly. And they're probably a little bit wrong, maybe completely wrong, but they kind of work. And so this folk knowledge, this folk data, these folk concepts are kind of heuristic, useful things that work for us, they allow us to do our life. So let me give an example. The thermostat in your house that adjusts the heat. Most people think of that as a kind of a valve, that I turn the dial, and so the more I turn it, the more heat I get, right? It just kind of goes up. And if I turn it all the way, I get lots of heat over here, right? If I turn it down, I get less heat. That's not how your thermostat works at all. Your thermostat's an off-on switch. It just either turns the furnace on or turns the furnace off. That's all it does. It just heats up to a certain level and then turns itself off. But it's an on-off switch, not a dial at all. The fact that you think it's a dial does not in any way impede yourself using your furnace and heating your house. So it's a piece of folk knowledge that is wrong conceptually, but works perfectly well. So I looked at this in terms of what do people think about AI? What sort of ideas do they hold that they use in their daily life around using these tools? And what was interesting when I interviewed these people is that a lot of people had the wrong idea about AI, but they used it. So a lot of people thought that AI systems were entirely computer-driven. They were entirely algorithmic. Algorithms did everything. It's not true. Algorithms are written by people. People build things, and those things get embedded into the algorithm. So really, AI is this interesting combination of machines and people that kind of coalesce. They also felt that they couldn't do anything to change an AI, that an AI was determined to do something and there was no way they could interfere with it. So they just let it do whatever it was going to do.
Huh.
And we had to recognize that you have an effect on it. What you do with an AI actually changes the way the AI behaves. So there's a certain amount of control that you have to manipulate, sometimes badly because it'll take you down that alley, but sometimes it'll learn more about you and it becomes more effective. So these misunderstandings, it wasn't that I wanted to change them. I wanted developers of systems to recognize that people held these kinds of beliefs and understandings and to be sensitive to them and to adapt what they were doing. So don't tell them they're wrong. Help them do it differently and understand it differently. I don't know if that gets to your question, but yeah, it was an interesting study. And obviously you can look at that sort of the beliefs we hold around things in lots of other contexts. And we all have these misunderstandings about lots of things. But they work. They're often called heuristics, that they still manage to do what we need to do with them.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for reading my PhD. I'll give you a signed copy later if you're...
In the early days of computing, there used to be the expression garbage in, garbage out. And I can see when you use the example earlier on, weather forecasting and so on, temperature, wind speed, that sort of thing, that's all objective, measurable information. But, vast amounts of information has an ideological bent to it. And unless these systems are getting everything, I don't know how it would even sort that out. One perspective, this perspective, this perspective, this perspective, seems to me, I don't get a lot of garbage, but you used an example, you said, help us to understand each other better. How could AI help us to understand each other better?
Two good questions, two good observations. I'll do the first one first. It does, in fact, learn from everything, which means it learns from, and assuming you train it on those sorts of things. And if you train it on something like Wikipedia or even most of the internet, you're going to get lots of different ideas, conflicting ideas, in fact. And that's a good thing, because it does correlate a lot of that to understand that there are different perspectives on things. So when you ask a system a question, it will often say, and reasonably so, here's a predominant view of something, and here's a counter view, another perspective. So it will actually try to present not just an answer, but a response that covers a range of possibilities in some cases. Not always, and certainly you can drive it down a particular direction that will be, unique and a specific ideological perspective, for example. But the fact that it actually includes lots of different ideological perspectives is important, because those perspectives exist in the world. And so, for example, here's a really harsh example, but it may be illustrative. Maybe I want to understand white supremacy. What am I going to do that? I guess I could find some books. I could certainly find some books. But I could also ask a system about it. Tell me about the tenets. Tell me about why people think this way. What do they do as a result? Where do they come from? Where is it more prevalent? I think, now I'm not saying we should understand that because we need to do something to counter it, but it helps to understand then that perspective and maybe how we can address it, how we can counter it in some ways. So I think that's a kind of a weird example. It would be better to say, as another example maybe, how can we understand people who are drug addicts? I'm going down dark sides, but drug addiction is so prevalent in our culture right now, and we tend to think of drug addicts in a certain way. But I think if you were to get the life experiences of some of these people, which you could get by inquiring about it, it would open a door, open a window into understanding maybe that life, that culture, that struggle in ways that we wouldn't any other way, unless you went and consciously tried to interact with a community. I don't know if that's a really good answer to your question. I don't know why I chose two terrible things to learn about, but maybe it's because they're difficult issues, and that's a barrier we often, we don't want to talk about those because it's hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, not a great, interesting. Thank you for that question. Oh, there was another part of that question though. It was, what was your second part? Oh, sorry, you can
It's
just
okay.
tell.
You can just say it.
Just tell me.
We'll repeat it.
Two-parter, the question of the information that goes in,
Yeah.
Right.
ideological slants to it,
The information that goes in, the ideological slants,
and then how it can help us understand.
and how it
okay.
can help us
So we
understand
did
one
get to
another.
those
I think you,
questions.
yeah,
Okay,
I think you
perfect.
did both.
I didn't want to miss your other point.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I think must be 4 or 5 decades ago, there was a book written called The Dumbing Down of America, or something like that, very close to that title.
Yep.
And so my question is going to be about how you see AI in education over the next few years. We have, I think, quite a way to go with the whole critical thinking business and everything, and the split in those who have the ability to use it and use it properly versus those people who aren't going to be able to probably use it very much at all. So where do you think all that is going to go?
So a couple things there. Thanks, Jim, for that question.
Great question.
The digital divide is now an algorithmic divide or an AI divide, if you want to put it that way. People who can use those tools and people who can't or don't have access to them in some way. And it's really the same issue. And I'm going to put my library hat on again and say this is what libraries have always done. We've always made these kinds of tools available to people and tried to humanize their access. So I know we are doing it with AI. There's a lot of work to still be done, but it is a place where everybody can go, and we encourage everybody to be there. So I do think of libraries as super important in being on the front end of that. But I also think we need to think about that in terms of the educational environment more generally. We should be thinking about this from grade school on. It's one of those things. It is like literacy. We need that kind of literacy in young children as well as in adult literacy going forward. So curriculum stuff would be one area. But I think there's another interesting one that is maybe a bit more transformative. And I'm not real sure where this is going to go, but one of the one of the amazing things about AI is you can have a teacher, an instructor, entirely designed for you, who knows you, knows your skills, knows your abilities, knows where your deficiencies are. They can be a digital tutor that could be an entire university for you, entire school for you, that allow you to learn at your own level, with validation going on, with encouragement, with growth, all done through an intelligent tutor. And we're seeing a number of these evolve where people who have no access to schools or schooling just doesn't work, traditionally doesn't work for them. And a lot of the computer-aided stuff was kind of a little bit flaky, didn't really do it. These are very powerful models that can be that intelligent, encouraging tutor. And I can definitely see, for better or for worse, for some people, that would be a brilliant way for them to learn in ways they could never do in any other way. They'd simply fall through the cracks. It obviously encourages isolation, which is a problem. We have to think about that. But in terms of the power of a personalized learning environment that was always there, challenging and encouraging, working people through a curriculum that was standard and effective, I just think it's a window opening for people that really had no other choices before. I don't know. I think a lot of people, for example, learn off YouTube these days, right?
That's true.
And YouTube is a pretty primitive kind of learning tool, really. It's just television on the internet, right? This is not. An AI tutor is in a whole different league. So whether that's a good or a bad thing, it's a good thing for some people. It's got its disadvantages as well.
Can I jump in here on the education question there? So, like, we didn't even talk about, like, the bugaboo of students using AI instead of doing their own work, right? And how hard it is for teachers and professors to, like, scope that out. And, yeah, what's your take on that? Like,
My take is we got to go all in.
Really? Okay.
We tried to ban calculators. We tried to ban access to the internet. And it never worked. I mean, our students are smart, it turns out. They learn how to go work around this. So I think we should let every student use it. I think we should make sure, just like we make data available in the library, tools available that everybody gets to use, we should make AI available to all our students, encourage them to use it, and encourage them to use it effectively. Yes, it could write an article or an essay for them. But to be honest, if what we're trying to train people to do is write essays, we've missed the boat on what we're really trying to teach them. You know, essay writing is not the skill that we're trying to teach when we put an essay on we're trying to teach critical understanding, deep thinking, and yes, you end up producing an essay, but the essay is a way of showing what you did. Well, the AI can lead you through, I think, a different kind of, much more in-depth interaction. It can challenge you, it can provide ideas, it can force you to confront discrepancies or counterfactual ideas that you have. I think rather than try to control it, we should absolutely encourage it. And you know what? I think you'll find if we did that, a lot of students will say, okay, in this class we're not going to use it at all. We're going to decide to not use it because we want to do it a different way. We want to learn a different way. And in some classes, they're great. Well, we can use it. And that it means the assessment, I think, of learning has to change.
that's, yeah.
Essay assignments are going to be really counterproductive if we know that the AI can simply generate it. And frankly, if an AI can generate sorry, a quick observation. Some of colleagues of mine put their syllabus for their course into AI and said, write the essay. And it did. It did a really good job of writing the essay. He would have given them, maybe a B+, maybe a B-, something like that. Okay, if it can do that, that's not the end point. That's the starting point for a course, where the AI generates this essay based on the curriculum, and the students have to then dissect that response. Find counter arguments.
Interesting.
Play with it.
Interesting.
It's not the end; it's the beginning.
Interesting.
Turn these things on their heads.
That's such a great take. Yes. Another question. Yeah.
Sorry, I went on too long with that one.
No, that's fine.
It's really
That's
fun,
good.
that one.
Enjoying your talk. I'm just questioning whether you think it might create intellectual conformity as opposed to creativity. And I'll use a simple example. Jazz saxophone from the 50s and 60s wasn't played perfectly, but there was creativity, and everyone had their own sound. You could tell who was playing. Today, it's played perfectly, but it's all played the same, and it's frankly boring. And do you fear that this might happen?
Oh, I can think of some jazz players that don't do that for me, but yes, I do get it. I mean, John Colt. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. Those jazz players that you talked about, some of them whom I'm very fond of as well, they were not largely well known. You know, they were known within circles. They played within certain clubs. They became well known, but they played in obscurity for a long time before they became kind of accepted into the mainstream. I think if we're looking for creativity, and we should always look for creativity, don't look in the obvious places. Look in the places you wouldn't expect to look at. Go to different places on the internet. Go to find different people who are not mainstream. They're the ones that are challenging. There are some fabulous, fabulous art that's being developed using AI as a tool, not as an end part, but as a tool to develop something, to do something else. And it's weird stuff. But you know, all that creative stuff tends to seem a little weird and odd at the beginning, and then you know they're playing this too fast. You know, that sort of jazz. Why don't they slow that down? So I think there's lots of creativity. It's just not in mainstream culture. It's off to the side, and so it's going to take a little bit of finding and maybe some guides to help you find it and get there. But I actually think as much as there's a phrase out now called AI slop, and the idea of AI slop is that we will be inundated more and more with stuff written by AI, and it'll just start feeding off itself. So the AIs will learn from other AIs and generate more AI stuff, and this slop will become sort of meaningless drivel. It actually is a much bigger problem. This is a word you can use at any time with your friends. It's called model collapse. You can use that and tell people about it. Model collapse is when it learns from itself and it just literally implodes. So that's a problem. But I think there's lots of other stuff going on that is very different from that, and we just have to find it. We have to look for it. It's there. There's more creative people working in our society now than ever any other time in history, and mainstream culture has always been kind of, it's that stuff outside of mainstream culture that has always been more exciting. So find someone. There's a good idea. Find an artist that everybody hates. Maybe worth following that person.
You spoke about AI in the world of academia and the world of arts. We're in a cathedral, a church. You also spoke interestingly earlier about the dangers of AI leading you down an affirming rabbit hole where it affirms you, oh, you're a prophet, you're something like that. Mm-hmm. Given that danger, and given you're sitting next to a person who by admission says, I live in a relational world between people and people and God, is there a role for AI in faith? Is there a role for AI maybe in creating and leading worship? And would that be valid worship or spiritual direction?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I'm probably going to struggle with this, but let me see what I can say. The answer, I think, is yes, because I think it's a tool to raise concepts and ideas and encourage people to think about certain kinds of directions or ideas or thoughts. And it can do that in a very positive way. So I think of, for example, a lot of religious literature, which is often embedded in very strong moral codes. I mean, almost always very strong moral codes. that kind of information, that kind of perspective, tends to not be as prevalent in the wider information space, if I could put it that way. So if you could channel is not the right word, but if you could accentuate and elevate that, I think then that moral code, that moral conversation you will have as a result, is really very uplifting. And I think, as opposed to going down the dark side, it's the inspirational side that this tool can be for you. Even in my case where I think the moral codes of many religions are extremely powerful, even for someone like me who frankly is an atheist. I find them encouraging, I find them enlightening for me, helpful to me even. And so I think that's the kind of connection, I guess, that these tools can provide, maybe. I don't think we want to see them as an end state. I think we want to see them as a development state, if I could put it that way, right? It's not an outcome we're looking for, it's a process. And I think it can be very effective there. I don't know if I'm answering your question. It's a very interesting question, especially given our situation. Maybe you should answer this one.
Well, I know for a fact that there are religious leaders out there who are talking about how AI can help them do aspects of their job so that there's more time for the relational aspect to it. We've actually, Tim, who introduced us, he's actually asked me to go find some helpful videos and trainings and things that would teach us, like, okay, where could we use this that would streamline some things that right now take a lot more time, that keep us from that would make more space for us to do what we're really good at. The simple example is like, somebody please take my minutes, right? Like, but I don't even know all of those things yet. But hopefully that's the kind of thing. But I am intrigued by this. I did hear that there was like a youth leadership thing one that they did recently, and they asked the young people to write homilies, and they were all AI generated. They all, because they didn't know what else to do. So I think that's kind of an interesting starting point, right? But yeah, I still would want, and it's kind of tied to this creativity question too, right? Like how much do we give, but isn't that always with all technology? How much do we give ourselves over to the technology, and how much do we use the technology to create something? But
there's also kind of another interesting example. I mean, how many people and students in that would have known what a homily maybe even was? Right. Yeah. And the beauty of AI, it's probably ingested 1 million homilies, right? So you can actually then play with the idea of what a homily does and how it's structured and what it's meant to do at certain stages, and you can use it as a tool to explore not just the ideas but the form as well. Right. Which is, I mean, you just can't do that any other way effectively.
Except for study.
Right. Well, they won't do that. They're students, right? They're young. Not going to do that.
And we have time, I think, for just one question. No, I think not. Actually, I look more in time. No, that was not the number I thought it was. I think that we will be concluding.
Can I do one more last thing before we conclude?
One last thing before we conclude.
I'm a librarian, so I brought a book.
Of course.
And it was a book I thought might be really helpful if what you wanted to get a broader sense of this. It's called Co-Intelligence by a guy named Ethan Mollick. I'll bring it up and show it in a minute, but I'm sure the
Co-Intelligence by
Ethan Mollick.
Ethan Mollick.
I'm sure the public library has it. I'm sure you can get it at your local independent bookstore. And because I'm going to give this one to Monica for herself, you can also borrow it from her when she's finished reading it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
this
sweet.
was wonderful to be invited, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you. I just want to say what a pleasure it's been to have you. I know that I am much more educated from this evening. I'm feeling the kind of education that's really helpful in life. I'm feeling both encouraged but also wiser about how to, about the warnings, right? The things we need to be concerned about. I feel empowered to be able to not only dive into like using this, but also to advocate well for what needs to be done, I think, in our society. I think that's really essential on a number of fronts. This seems to be where we land whenever we do a cathedral chat, is what are we advocating for, right? And because it's important, we have a lot of things that we need to. So thank you so much for giving your time. We have just a little gift. I have a book back for you, actually. What's in there is 2 books. One is a cookbook from our Cathedral Cafe, but the other, Mr. Librarian, which you might appreciate, is a book about the cathedral space, about the artwork in the cathedral that one of our parishioners created. So thank you very much, that from us. I just want, it takes a lot of us to put this together. I want to thank Turner back there for doing our AV. Thank you, Turner. The hand goes up. I really want to thank the Spiritual Growth Committee for everything to make this evening happen. As Tim already mentioned, everybody, Tim and Matthew and Catherine and Marie, we kind of put our brains together. I want to thank Jim Ferguson back there who did our hospitality. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. He did our hospitality. So please, those of you who are present, we have yummies in the back. Please partake. And thank you for all of you for coming, including those of you who are watching online and those of you who are watching after the fact. I just really appreciate everyone taking the time to come tonight and learn a little bit more. Again, our next Cathedral Chat, this is the end of our series this year. Our next Cathedral Chat we're hoping to have in the fall. And they tend to be on issues that we advocate for, things like climate justice, community engagement, and in this case, spiritual growth. So thank you all so much for coming. And again, Michael, thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.
That was fun.
And thank you, Monica.